Welcome to Mafia Stories, where every story reveals more than crime and power. Here, you'll discover loyalty, betrayal, ambition, and the choices that shape a lifetime. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that a person's worth is measured by the love they give, not by the wounds they carry, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable stories. Now, let's return to Naomi Carter. Naomi Carter's fingers trembled as she signed her name across the last page of the contract. The cheap fluorescent light above her flickered every few seconds, casting pale shadows across the cramped office. The stale smell of old paper and cigarette smoke clung to the walls, while the rusty ceiling fan groaned with every slow rotation. Outside, rain tapped softly against the cracked window, as though the sky itself wished it could look away. She was 27 years old, and at that moment, her own parents were selling her. Not because she had committed a crime, not because she had disgraced the family, but because a doctor had quietly spoken 6 words 3 months earlier. "You'll never be able to conceive." Those words had stolen more than her future. They had stolen her place in the only family she had ever known. Naomi lowered her eyes, refusing to look toward the 2 people sitting across the table. Her mother never cried. Her father never hesitated. The envelope filled with cash resting beside his hand seemed far more important than the daughter who had once run into his arms after every nightmare. "You understand the agreement?" the broker asked without emotion. His expensive gray suit contrasted sharply with the peeling paint surrounding him. He flipped through the paperwork as if he were processing a shipment instead of a human life. Naomi nodded. Her voice had disappeared hours ago. "The receiving family has withdrawn from the marriage arrangement after reviewing your medical records." The words landed gently. The pain did not. They specifically requested a woman capable of giving them grandchildren. Silence settled over the room. Heavy, merciless. Her mother finally spoke. "You should have told them sooner." No comfort. No apology. Only disappointment. Naomi looked up for the first time. "I didn't know until the surgery." Her voice cracked so softly it almost vanished beneath the rain. The surgery. 6 months earlier, she nearly died after emergency treatment for internal bleeding caused by a rare reproductive condition. The doctors had saved her life, but they couldn't save her ability to become pregnant. She had spent weeks grieving in silence. Her parents had spent those same weeks calculating her value. Her father slid the envelope toward himself. "It's done." Just 2 words. As if signing away a daughter required no more emotion than paying an electricity bill. Naomi felt something inside her quietly break. Not loudly, not dramatically. Some heartbreaks arrived without tears. They simply left an empty room where hope used to live. She stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her modest navy dress. No one stopped her. No one asked where she would go. No one said they were sorry. Outside, the cold rain greeted her more gently than her own family had. She stepped onto the sidewalk carrying only a worn suitcase, a faded photograph of herself at 8 years old, and a small silver cross that had belonged to her late grandmother. The only person who had ever told her that love was something you gave, not something you earned. Cars rushed past without slowing. People hurried beneath umbrellas. The city continued breathing as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Perhaps nothing had. After all, tragedies rarely announced themselves. Sometimes they looked exactly like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Naomi found shelter beneath the awning of a closed bakery. Water dripped steadily from the edge of the roof. She hugged her coat tighter around herself. For the first time in her life, she had nowhere to go. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. "Miss Carter." The voice belonged to an older woman, calm and professional. "My name is Eleanor Brooks. I oversee domestic staffing for a private household." Naomi frowned. "I believe you've recently become available for employment." Available. Such a polite word for abandoned. "We're looking for someone willing to live on site." Naomi closed her eyes. "I don't have experience with children." A brief silence followed. Then the woman answered with unexpected honesty. "Neither have the last 12 women who quit." Naomi looked up into the gray sky. "What kind of family is this?" The answer came quietly. "A widowed Korean businessman." Another pause. "He is raising 3 5-year-old children alone." Naomi almost declined. She felt too broken to care for anyone. But before she could speak, Eleanor added one final sentence. "They don't need a perfect woman. They only need someone who won't leave. The rain suddenly seemed quieter. Naomi stared at the tiny silver cross resting in her palm. For months, everyone had defined her by the child she could never give birth to. No one had ever asked whether she still had enough love to raise one. Far across the city, inside a mansion surrounded by iron gates and armed security, 3 small children were unknowingly waiting for someone they had never met. And the man feared by an entire criminal empire had no idea that the woman the world had thrown away was about to walk through his front door. Sometimes destiny doesn't knock. Sometimes it arrives carrying nothing except a broken heart and the courage to love again. Ethan Kang's mornings always began before sunrise. Long before the first rays of light touched the glass walls of his estate overlooking the Hudson River, he was already dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, standing silently in the kitchen with 3 lunchboxes spread across the marble island. Few people would have believed that the man whose name carried influence throughout New York struggled with something as ordinary as cutting strawberries into heart-shaped slices because his daughter refused to eat them any other way. His executive assistant often joked that Ethan could negotiate billion-dollar contracts before breakfast, yet somehow lost every argument with a 5-year-old who insisted that pancakes tasted better when they looked like little bears. He never laughed at those jokes, but every morning he still reached for the bear-shaped mold hidden in the back drawer. Upstairs, the mansion slowly came alive. Noah sprinted through the hallway wearing one shoe and carrying the other in his hand. Liam sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, completely absorbed in building a castle from colorful blocks, forgetting that school began in less than an hour. Little Ella stood quietly by the nursery window, clutching the faded stuffed rabbit that had belonged to her late mother, staring into the gardens with eyes far older than any child should possess. The housekeeper sighed as another nanny hurried down the grand staircase, carrying 2 suitcases. She did not even stop to say goodbye. She simply handed over her security badge, apologized through trembling lips, and disappeared through the front gates before breakfast had even been served. She was the 12th caregiver to leave within 8 months. None of them had been cruel. Most had been highly recommended. But every one of them eventually admitted the same painful truth. They knew how to supervise children. They simply did not know how to heal hearts that had been broken far too young. Ethan watched the departing car through the enormous front window without saying a single word. His face revealed nothing, yet his shoulders carried a weight that no expensive suit could hide. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, the elegant woman who managed every domestic employee on the estate, approached quietly with a leather folder pressed against her chest. "I have one more applicant," she said carefully. Ethan did not immediately respond. He poured a fresh cup of black coffee and stared into the steam rising above it. "Does she have childcare experience?" Eleanor hesitated for just a moment. "No." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Then why is she on my list?" Eleanor slid a single resume across the counter. It contained very little. A few housekeeping jobs, restaurant work, volunteer hours at a neighborhood church. No prestigious references. No impressive qualifications. Almost nothing that would normally survive 5 seconds of Ethan Kang's attention. Yet Eleanor quietly added, "Every employer described her the same way." Ethan finally looked up. "How?" Eleanor smiled gently. "They all said that wherever she worked, people felt calmer after she arrived." Ethan remained silent. It was not the answer he expected, and somehow it was the first one that mattered. Upstairs, Ella suddenly laughed as Noah accidentally chased his own backpack down the hallway, while Liam proudly announced that his block castle now needed a queen instead of another king. Ethan listened to the sound of their laughter fading through the mansion. For the first time in months, he found himself wondering whether the next person walking through those front gates might not simply change the children's lives. She might quietly change his as well. The following afternoon, Naomi Carter stood outside a pair of wrought iron gates, so tall they seemed to disappear into the gray autumn sky. Beyond them stretched an estate unlike anything she had ever imagined, where perfectly trimmed gardens surrounded a mansion built from pale limestone and wide glass windows that reflected the afternoon sun. She tightened her grip on the worn suitcase resting beside her feet. Every instinct told her she did not belong in a place like this. Her shoes were polished but old. Her navy coat had been carefully repaired at the sleeves, and everything she owned could fit inside a single suitcase. Even so, she straightened her shoulders before pressing the intercom button. A calm voice welcomed her inside, and moments later the heavy gates opened without a sound. Eleanor Brooks greeted her at the front entrance with a warm smile that immediately eased some of the fear Naomi had carried all morning. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said gently. "I know today cannot be easy." Naomi offered a small smile in return. "Thank you for giving me a chance." As they walked through the entrance hall, Naomi could not help noticing how beautiful the home was, yet something felt unexpectedly lonely. Fresh flowers stood on polished tables, sunlight poured through towering windows, and every surface was spotless. But there were children's drawings taped carefully beside a grand staircase, tiny shoes scattered near the mudroom door, and 3 colorful backpacks resting against a bench as though life was constantly trying to soften the silence that filled the enormous house. "The children are upstairs," Eleanor explained. "There is one thing you should know before meeting them." Naomi listened carefully. "They have learned that people leave." Those 6 words settled quietly in Naomi's heart. She understood them far better than Eleanor could have imagined. Before another word could be spoken, laughter echoed down the hallway. A little boy raced around the corner wearing a bright blue sweater, only to stop the instant he saw a stranger standing beside Eleanor. Another boy appeared behind him carrying a toy airplane. A few feet farther back stood a little girl hugging a well-loved stuffed rabbit against her chest. None of them spoke. They simply watched Naomi with cautious curiosity. Naomi did not step closer. She did not introduce herself with cheerful excitement the way so many adults often did around children. Instead, she slowly knelt until she was at their eye level. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Naomi." She waited. No one answered. She smiled anyway. "I was a little nervous about meeting you today." Noah blinked. Adults were not supposed to admit they were nervous. Liam tilted his head, studying her carefully. Ella held her rabbit a little tighter, but did not look away. Naomi reached into her coat pocket and removed a tiny wooden bird no larger than the palm of her hand. Its paint had faded over the years, but its smooth surface revealed how often it had been held. "My grandmother gave this to me when I was scared," Naomi said quietly. "She told me that brave people are not the ones who never feel afraid. Brave people are the ones who choose kindness even while they are afraid." Without asking anyone to take it, Naomi simply placed the little bird on the floor between them. Then she stood and took one respectful step backward. A long silence followed. Finally, Ella walked forward, picked up the little wooden bird with both hands, and looked up at Naomi with the smallest hint of a smile. Upstairs, Ethan Kong had paused outside his office after hearing the unexpected quiet below. He looked down toward the foyer and saw something he had not witnessed in many months. For the very first time, none of his children were trying to run away from the newest person who had entered their home. Naomi did not become part of the household overnight. She never assumed that kindness could erase grief in a single afternoon, and she never expected 3 children to trust someone they had only just met. Instead, she allowed every day to unfold one small moment at a time. The first morning she prepared breakfast, she quietly asked the kitchen staff what each child liked to eat. Noah loved blueberry pancakes, but refused to admit it because he wanted to seem grown up. Liam would happily eat the same cereal every morning if no one reminded him to try something different. Ella preferred warm oatmeal with cinnamon because it reminded her of the breakfasts her mother used to make. Naomi remembered every detail without writing a single note. Within a week, the children stopped watching her with uncertainty and began looking for her whenever they entered a room. The mansion itself seemed to notice the difference. Music drifted softly from the family room instead of endless silence. The scent of fresh bread filled the kitchen on Sunday afternoons because Naomi believed that baking together was less about food and more about creating memories. She never rushed the children through their questions. When Noah asked why leaves change color, she walked outside with all 3 of them instead of searching for an answer on her phone. When Liam became frustrated after knocking over a block tower he had spent an hour building, she sat beside him on the floor and quietly built another one from the beginning without saying a word. When Ella woke from a nightmare and wandered into the hallway holding her stuffed rabbit close to her chest, Naomi simply wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders and stayed nearby until the little girl fell asleep again. She never tried to replace the love the children had lost. She simply gave them the love she still had to offer. Ethan noticed every change, even though he rarely spoke about it. For months, he had become accustomed to returning home after sunset to find exhausted employees counting the minutes until their shifts ended. Now he found laughter, echoing through the hallways before he even stepped inside. One evening, he paused outside the family room after hearing excited voices. Through the slightly open door, he watched Naomi sitting on the rug surrounded by crayons, construction paper, and 3 children proudly creating paper crowns. Noah insisted everyone needed a different color. Liam carefully folded each crown so it would fit perfectly. Ella quietly placed a tiny paper flower on Naomi's crown before smiling to herself. Naomi laughed with them, not loudly, but with the kind of gentle joy that made everyone around her feel safe. She did not notice Ethan standing in the doorway because her attention remained exactly where it belonged. Ethan remained there for several moments without interrupting. It had been a very long time since this house had sounded like a home instead of a carefully managed residence. Eleanor quietly approached from behind and smiled as she noticed him watching. "You were getting home earlier," she observed. Ethan glanced toward his watch before realizing she was right. Without thinking, he had begun shortening meetings, postponing dinners, and declining invitations that once seemed important. He had not made a conscious decision to change his schedule. He had simply found himself wanting to hear the laughter waiting inside these walls. As the evening sunlight settled across the room, Ethan watched Naomi helping Ella straighten her paper crown while Noah and Liam argued over whose drawing deserved a place on the refrigerator. For the first time since losing his wife, he allowed himself to believe that healing did not always arrive through extraordinary miracles. Sometimes it entered quietly through the front door carrying nothing more than patience, compassion, and a heart that refused to stop loving. Autumn settled gently over the estate, painting the gardens with shades of amber and crimson as the weeks quietly slipped by. The children no longer counted the days since Naomi had arrived because, in their minds, she had simply become part of every tomorrow. Noah waited for her to cheer during his backyard soccer games, even when he missed the goal by several feet. Liam proudly carried every drawing he finished directly to the kitchen because he knew Naomi would study every tiny detail before placing it on the refrigerator with the same care as a priceless masterpiece. Ella no longer wandered the hallways alone after difficult dreams. Instead, she would softly knock on Naomi's bedroom door, knowing a warm cup of chamomile tea and a comforting story always waited on the other side. Even the household staff noticed that the mansion had changed. Conversations had replaced silence. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining table every Friday because Naomi insisted that ordinary days deserved beauty too. She remembered birthdays, thanked every employee by name, and somehow made each person feel seen without ever asking for attention herself. Ethan found himself observing these quiet changes from a distance more often than he admitted. One evening, he returned home earlier than expected after a business meeting ended ahead of schedule. As he entered through the side hallway, he heard soft piano music floating through the house. Curious, he followed the melody until he reached the family room. Naomi sat beside the old piano that had remained untouched for years. She was not performing perfectly. She played slowly, carefully, smiling whenever one of the children sang the wrong words on purpose. Noah beat the rhythm with wooden spoons against a pillow. Liam proudly declared himself the conductor of the family orchestra. Ella leaned against Naomi's shoulder, singing so quietly that only someone standing nearby could hear her. Ethan remained unnoticed in the doorway, listening as laughter blended with the gentle melody filling every corner of the room. He suddenly realized he could no longer remember the last evening the mansion had felt so alive. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep, Ethan found Naomi carefully washing the last few dishes despite repeated offers from the kitchen staff to finish the work themselves. "You do not have to do that," he said. Naomi looked up with a gentle smile. "I know." She dried her hands with a towel before adding, "But sometimes caring for a home is another way of saying thank you." Ethan studied her expression for a moment. There was no expectation behind her kindness, no hidden request, no attempt to impress him. She simply believed that gratitude should be practiced through ordinary actions. Before he could respond, the sound of a ringing telephone echoed through the quiet kitchen. Eleanor answered first, but her expression changed almost immediately. She glanced toward Naomi with visible concern before walking over. "It is for you," she said softly. The caller insists it is a family matter. Naomi's smile slowly faded. Very few people still called her family. She accepted the phone with uncertain hands. At first, she listened without speaking. Then the color gradually disappeared from her face. Her fingers tightened around the receiver, and her eyes filled with a sadness she had worked so hard to leave behind. When the call finally ended, she remained perfectly still, staring through the dark kitchen window as though the past had somehow found its way back to the only place where she had begun to feel at peace. Naomi did not sleep that night. Long after the lights throughout the mansion had faded and the last footsteps disappeared into silence, she remained seated beside her bedroom window, holding her grandmother's small silver cross between her fingers. The phone call had lasted less than 5 minutes, yet it had reopened wounds she believed had finally begun to heal. Her mother had not called to ask whether she was safe. She had not asked whether Naomi had found happiness or forgiveness. Instead, she had delivered a simple message. The family who had once rejected the marriage proposal because Naomi could not have children had recently suffered financial losses, and now they wished to speak with her again. They were suddenly willing to overlook what they had once called her greatest flaw. Naomi quietly closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she realized how easily people could confuse need with love. The following morning, she smiled for the children exactly as she always did. She helped Noah finish tying his sneakers after he accidentally knotted the laces together. She admired Liam's newest drawing of a castle surrounded by trees. She braided Ella's hair before school, carefully fastening a small blue ribbon at the end just the way the little girl liked it. No one would have guessed that Naomi's heart felt heavier than it had in weeks. No one except Ethan. He had spent years learning to read expressions that other people overlooked, and he noticed the difference immediately. Her smile remained gentle, but it lingered only for the children. The moment they looked away, sadness quietly returned to her eyes. That afternoon, after the triplets had left with their tutor for an art program across town, Ethan found Naomi sitting alone in the garden beneath a maple tree whose golden leaves drifted softly onto the stone pathway. A warm breeze carried the scent of autumn through the air as she watched the fountain ripple without really seeing it. Ethan approached without disturbing the silence. "Something happened after that phone call," he said calmly. It was not a question. Naomi lowered her eyes for several seconds before finally speaking. "My parents called." Ethan remained still, allowing her to continue only when she was ready. "The people who once refused to marry me because I could not have children have changed their minds." Ethan frowned slightly, confused. Naomi gave a quiet smile that carried no joy. "Not because I changed. Their circumstances did." She gently turned the silver cross in her hand before adding, "It made me realize that some people only see value when they need something from you." The garden became silent again except for the soft sound of falling leaves. After a long pause, Ethan asked the question that had quietly remained in his heart since the day she arrived. "Do you believe a woman becomes a mother only by giving birth?" Naomi looked toward the distant playground where the triplets usually laughed together after school. Her eyes softened. "If motherhood only comes from giving birth," she answered quietly, "then perhaps I was never meant to be a mother." She took a slow breath before continuing. "But if motherhood means protecting a child, comforting them when they are afraid, celebrating their smallest victories, and loving them without asking for anything in return, then I have learned that love can grow in places where biology never could." Ethan did not answer immediately. He simply watched the woman who believed she had nothing left to offer speak with a compassion that filled every empty space around her. And in that quiet autumn garden, he realized that the world had measured Naomi by what she could never become, while he had begun to see her for everything she already was. The conversation beneath the maple tree lingered in Ethan's thoughts long after the afternoon had faded into evening. During meetings, while advisors discussed investments and schedules, he found himself remembering Naomi's quiet words instead of the reports spread across the conference table. She had never asked for sympathy. She had never complained about the people who had abandoned her. She had simply continued giving love without expecting it to be returned. That kind of strength was far rarer than anything money could buy. Back at the mansion, the triplets were unusually excited. Their kindergarten teacher had assigned a family project, asking each child to create a picture of the people who made them feel safe. Crayons, colored paper, and glitter covered the dining room table as the 3 children worked with complete concentration. Naomi moved from one chair to another, helping only when someone asked, allowing each child to make every decision on their own. Noah proudly drew himself kicking a soccer ball, while Ethan stood beside him wearing an oversized blue tie. Liam carefully sketched the family dog, even though the estate did not actually have one, insisting that every happy family should someday adopt a golden retriever. Ella spent much longer on her drawing than her brothers. She chose each color slowly before finally placing her crayons down with a satisfied smile. When Ethan arrived home that evening, the children ran toward him carrying their artwork. Noah explained every detail of his picture with endless enthusiasm. Liam proudly pointed to the imaginary dog and announced that he had already chosen its name. Then Ella quietly held out her paper without saying a word. Ethan accepted it gently. His eyes moved across the drawing. There was the mansion with its tall windows. 3 smiling children stood in the garden. Ethan was there. Naomi was there. Above every figure floated a bright yellow sun. Across the top, written in careful kindergarten handwriting, were 5 simple words. My family makes me brave. Ethan looked at Ella. This is beautiful, he said softly. Can you tell me about it? Ella nodded. She pointed to Naomi first. She reads stories when I cannot sleep. Then she pointed toward Ethan. Daddy keeps us safe. Finally, she looked up with complete innocence and added, everybody needs both. Naomi lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. Before anyone could change the subject, Noah suddenly spoke with the confidence only children possess. She is already our mommy anyway. Liam nodded immediately. Yes, we just forgot to tell the grown-ups. The room became completely still. Even the household staff standing nearby exchanged quiet glances. Naomi's eyes widened in surprise. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Ella simply walked over, slipped her tiny hand into Naomi's, and leaned gently against her side, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. No ceremony had declared it. No document had created it. No adult had suggested it. 3 little hearts had quietly reached the same conclusion on their own. Ethan watched the children gather around Naomi, noticing how naturally they sought her comfort, her encouragement, and her presence. In that silent moment, he understood something that every expert, every report, and every recommendation had failed to teach him. Families were not always formed by the people who shared your name. Sometimes they were formed by the people who chose to stay when everyone else had chosen to leave. The days that followed carried a quiet sense of peace unlike anything the mansion had experienced in years. Nothing dramatic changed overnight, yet every ordinary moment seemed to grow more meaningful. Ethan found himself lingering at the breakfast table instead of rushing out the door before sunrise. The children no longer glanced nervously toward the front entrance, wondering who might disappear next. Even the household staff smiled more often, as though the entire estate had finally remembered how a home was supposed to feel. One crisp Saturday morning, Eleanor Brooks knocked gently on Ethan's office door, carrying a thick leather folder. She placed it carefully on his desk without saying a word. Ethan looked up from the papers he had been reviewing. What is it? Eleanor answered with her usual calm professionalism. The documents you requested. Ethan rested his hand on the folder for several seconds before opening it. Inside were neatly organized legal papers prepared by one of the city's most respected family attorneys. There were no business contracts, no investment agreements, and no property transfers. Instead, every page focused on something far more personal. Naomi's long-term employment would become permanent if she accepted. A private trust had been established to guarantee her financial security regardless of future circumstances. Most importantly, the documents granted her full legal authority to make educational and medical decisions for the triplets whenever Ethan was traveling or unavailable. She would no longer simply care for the children. She would officially become the person entrusted to protect them. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Ethan asked Naomi to join him in the library. A fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace, while rain tapped gently against the tall windows overlooking the gardens. Naomi entered quietly, assuming they were about to discuss the children's school schedules or holiday plans. Instead, Ethan placed the leather folder on the coffee table between them. I would like you to read these, he said. Naomi opened the folder with curious eyes. As she slowly turned each page, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. By the time she reached the final document, tears blurred the words before her. She looked up almost immediately. This cannot be right. Ethan nodded. It is exactly right. Naomi gently closed the folder. You trust me with something this important? Ethan did not hesitate. I already have. His voice remained steady. The paperwork simply catches up with what has been true for months. Naomi struggled to find the right words. I do not know what to say. Ethan offered the faintest smile. Then let me say something instead. He leaned forward slightly. The world measured your worth by the children you could never have. My children measured your worth by the love you gave them without being asked. I believe they made the wiser judgment. Naomi lowered her eyes as quiet tears slipped down her cheeks. For so many years she had searched for acceptance by trying to become who other people expected her to be. She had never imagined that one family would simply accept who she already was. She carefully placed her hand over the folder as though protecting something precious. Outside, the rain slowly gave way to moonlight breaking through the clouds, and inside the quiet library, a woman who had once believed she had lost every chance to belong realized that she had not been handed a new job. She had been entrusted with a place inside a family that had already chosen her long before any signature appeared on a single page. Spring arrived quietly, bringing fresh blossoms to the gardens that had once stood silent through seasons of grief. The mansion no longer felt like a place where people merely lived. It had become a place where they belonged. Every hallway carried echoes of laughter. Every room held reminders of shared memories, and every ordinary day seemed richer because it was spent together. Noah proudly announced that he had finally scored his first goal during a weekend soccer game, and the first person he searched for in the crowd was Naomi, whose applause was louder than anyone else's. Liam filled sketchbooks with drawings of family adventures that had never happened, but somehow felt completely real. Ella continued carrying her mother's old stuffed rabbit, yet now she no longer held it because she was afraid. She carried it because it reminded her that love could be remembered without preventing new love from growing. One warm Saturday afternoon, Ethan invited the children and Naomi into the garden beneath the same maple tree where months earlier she had quietly questioned her own worth. A small wooden table stood. Beneath its branches, decorated with simple white flowers and 5 framed family photographs taken throughout the past year. There were no reporters, no business associates, and no grand celebration. Only the people who mattered most. Ethan handed Naomi a small envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside rested the final court documents confirming everything she had already accepted months before. Her role within the children's lives was now permanently protected, giving her the legal authority and security Ethan had promised. She looked at him with tears gathering once again. You have already given me more than I ever imagined, she whispered. Ethan smiled gently before answering. No, we simply recognized what was already true. You never needed to earn your place here. You created it through every ordinary act of love. Before Naomi could respond, 3 small voices interrupted at once. Noah wrapped his arms around her waist. Liam slipped one hand into hers. Ella looked up with the same quiet confidence she had shown from the beginning. Can we take another family picture? She asked. Eleanor happily lifted the camera while everyone gathered beneath the maple tree. Just before the shutter clicked, Ella looked toward Naomi and softly said, Smile, Mommy. This time, Naomi did not hesitate. She smiled through grateful tears as Ethan stood beside her and the children leaned close together. The photograph captured nothing extraordinary in the eyes of the world. It showed no wealth, no influence, and no remarkable achievement. It simply captured 5 people who had found one another after believing something precious had been lost forever. Months later, that photograph remained on the fireplace mantel where every visitor could see it. Some assumed Naomi had always been part of the family. Others never asked how their story began. The truth no longer required an explanation. A woman once rejected because she could never give birth had discovered that the deepest meaning of motherhood was never limited to biology. A father who believed he had to carry every burden alone learned that trust could heal what strength alone never could. 3 children who feared being abandoned found someone who chose to stay without being asked. And the people who had once measured Naomi's value by what she lacked gradually faded into the distance, while the family that measured her by the love she freely gave became the home she had searched for all her life. Some women bring children into the world through birth. Others bring hope, courage, and unconditional love into the hearts of children who need them most. In the end, that love became the strongest bond of all. And on that quiet spring afternoon, everyone beneath the old maple tree finally understood that the greatest families are not always the ones we are born into. They are the ones that choose one another every single day.